Hi, my name is John Early with the Radiation Research Society podcast, and today I am talking to Ye Yuan. Ye, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so this is my second radiation research meeting. My first one was actually, I have really fond memories. My first one was in Maui, so that was a great first meeting to go to. It was early in my graduate career. I did my training at Northwestern, actually in the lab of Gail Woloschak. We worked on radiosensitizing nanoparticles, and Gail's a great mentor for me throughout these years, and she still is. And when I get a chance to come back to Radiation Research Society meetings, I always jump at the chance. So now I'm in LA. I'm a radiation oncology resident at the University of California, Los Angeles. I'm also doing some research in the lab of Dr. Joanne Wiedhaus, who's the vice chair of research at UCLA.
Man, it sounds like you've got a full plate.
Yeah, it's a full plate, but I would say I enjoy I hate being bored, so right now I'm never bored, so that's a good thing.
How do you manage it? Sounds like these are some pretty complex projects you're working on.
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. My career aspirations are to kind of do the physician scientist role, kind of like an 80% research and 20% clinical role in the future. So, this has been a great time for me during residency to kind of learn how to balance these things out, how to structure my, research time, make the most out of that, while at the same time getting the most out of my clinical training.
Very cool. What draws you to the research side? I know you said you're 20%, you'd like to be 20% physician and 80% research. Yeah. What is it about research that speaks to you?
The part I really love about research and that I've always loved about research is, it's kind of the creative aspects for, nerdy people like me to be kind of creative. I've never been very good at art or music, but I think research really gives me that chance to kind of allow my creative juices to kind of express themselves in a way. So there's that, and I also always love to learn new things. And in grad school, in Gail's lab, and also as a research pathway resident at UCLA, I've really had the opportunity to kind of broaden my horizons and push my comfort levels and really learn some new techniques and new areas of research. So.
We were talking a bit about research and why you really like it and how it allows you to express your creativity. What is something specifically in research that you really get into that really lets you be creative? Is it something in like arranging like genomic data? Is it something about particle bombardment and running simulations?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'll start back, in Gail's lab. I came in to the lab with not, I think every grad student comes in with not a terrible idea of exactly what they're going to do, but Gail was really good, and she just kind of gave me like general, directions to go, and I kind of took it from there. And what I really enjoyed is that I built my, project from the ground up, my project was really unique because it really dovetailed with another part of her lab. She was building this device called the BioNanoprobe, which is this really cool X-ray fluorescence microscope at the Argonne National Labs, which allows you to do very fine, very high resolution X-ray fluorescence microscopy on cells. And it was a great technique. I was able to work with the physicists at Argonne, with material scientists at Northwestern, and I just love that interdisciplinary nature of that research.
Coming from your background as a radiation researcher, but also as a physician, how important is that interdisciplinary nature of radiation research in your daily work?
I think it's key because as a radiation oncologist, you work with physicians, obviously, in mutual, caring for mutual patients. But when you're doing radiation treatment planning, you're working with dosimetrists, you're working with physicists. You really are managing the interdisciplinary team every day when you're taking care of patients. So it's good to be able to speak the language, or at least, pretend to speak the language of a physicist or, a dosimetrist, and have some working knowledge of what it takes to the physics behind radiation treatment planning.
Cool. Who are some people in like your day-to-day operations that really help you achieve as much as you can in the lab?
Yeah, so I think in every lab, the mentor is key to that to you functioning well and getting the most out of your lab experience. And I think both Gail, when I was a graduate student, and Tanya, who was the research assistant professor back in my graduate school days, they were such a great inspiration for me, and also like a guiding light for me in terms of figuring out, going through, because every grad student goes through periods of their research where they feel like they're kind of stuck in a rut, and having that expert person you can turn to is always good. And I would say similarly right now, being in Joanne Wiedhaus's lab, she's been an excellent way of kind of guiding how to think about research questions, especially given that she's a physician scientist herself. It's been really good to talk to her about and see how she approaches basic science questions from a translational and clinical perspective.
Interesting. So earlier we talked about how much you're doing now, and you've got some interesting science. We're not quite to that yet, but
yeah.
What's your day look like right now? Like, what does it take to? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I always wake up with a big cup of coffee. That's pretty key. But right now, with my research pathway at UCLA, the department's been extremely supportive of my research. So I actually have tons of protected time to do basic science research. So I spend majority of my time in lab. Doing experiments or designing experiments, working with technicians in lab and other postdocs in lab, troubleshooting things, and just doing basic science research. But at the same time, I had that flexibility to go into clinic and talk to my clinical mentors as well. I work on a number of different projects, one of which is kind of very clinically based, with the head of the head and neck radiation oncology program at UCLA, Dr. Robert Chin. So we've been undertaking a pretty fruitful project looking at head and neck cancer patients. So
I know that head and neck can be very challenging because of all the tissues that are associated in that area.
Yeah. So those radiation treatment planning for head and neck cancer patients requires a lot of expertise. I would say I'm definitely, it's a very steep learning curve that I'm still trying to master. And also radiation treatment planning, or radiation treatments themselves for head and neck cancer patients can be very difficult. It's associated with a lot of side effects. And our challenge is to figure out, who would benefit the most from radiation, who, might have more issues with their radiation treatments.
Does your background as a physician really help you dial in these treatment plans? Like, I know just a standalone physicist or radiation biologist who may not be a physician might have a little bit of trouble planning how to create a care plan after an initial dosage. Have you utilized that at all?
Yeah, I think in head and neck cancer, it's one of the great things about it, and what I really like about it, is that head and neck cancer patients can be very complex. They could have, during their treatment, many medical issues come up that it forces you to be mindful of the holistic approach in terms of treating them. I think I've always tried to hold true to the saying that you're a physician first, right, and radiation oncologist second. So you always have to be mindful about what are the other medical problems that these patients have, and how do you manage these at the same time that you're taking care of their radiation treatments.
Cool. That sounds like a very good approach to helping someone who's in a very complex situation,
Yeah.
especially in an emerging field of science.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get into what you're working on right now.
Yeah.
So let's start at the top. The specifics of what you're working on, again, if you could refresh my memory.
Yeah. So, the abstract I submitted here to Radiation Research is a project I'm working with Dr. Wiedhaus at UCLA. She's been one of the pioneers in terms of looking at germline variants that might be prognostic or predictive of response to radiation treatments or other types of chemotherapies, not only response in terms of how will they, who will benefit the most, but also who might have more toxicity or side effects from these treatments. So my specific project is looking at one specific germline variant in the untranslated region, the intronic region of one of the key genes that's involved in the immune evasion. So PD-L1, programmed cell death, ligand 1 is pretty key right now, and we're really excited about it in oncology because it's the target of many immune checkpoint inhibitors. And so we're looking at a specific variant that appears to inhibit or alter the regulation of PD-L1 by a radiation-induced microRNA.
Just catch me up real fast. This is really interesting stuff. I just want to get caught on one term real fast. When you say immune evasion, is that specifically the cancer evading the radiation or the chemical reaction of what's being applied during radiation?
Right, so great question. So, immune evasion, I think has been more and more recognized that, cancer cells, malignant cells, not only are they able to multiply without, growth signals, but they're also able to avoid detection by the body's immune system, which is there as kind of the first line of defense to get rid of, cells that might be damaged by viruses or environmental factors. And because they're able to avoid that first line of defense, your immune system, they're able to grow unchecked. And that's why these new immune checkpoint inhibitors are really exciting, because they basically release the brakes on your immune system and allow your immune system to kind of recognize these immune cells, or these malignant cells rather.
Is there any risk when the immune system is the brakes are released and the immune system is allowed to go? Does this have the potential to trigger like an autoimmune response, or your immune system can go hyperactive, like with an allergic reaction that may not be there?
Right. So great question. So that is some of the side effects of immune checkpoint inhibitors are indeed some autoimmune effects, and increasingly one of the main questions that remains partially answered, I think, in clinical trials is whether or not combination of radiation and immune checkpoint inhibitors, does that actually increase the risk of developing some of these adverse effects.
Is the immune checkpoint inhibitor a temporary thing, or once those brakes are let go, it's on?
So your question is whether or not these patients, do they have to be on long-term immune?
Yeah, essentially, if you're on the immune inhibitor, and let's say you're taking medication that's allowing this to happen, when you stop taking the medication, will the immune system go back to its normal thing, or is it this is now a permanent condition because once that's open, it's open?
Yeah, so the research has shown, and it's pretty exciting, that some of these patients who do respond to immune checkpoint inhibitors have very durable responses. Their tumors remain under control for long periods of time, for years. And that's why it's so exciting, is that you do see some patients that respond beautifully and then respond for a long time. But one of the things that goes back to why we're looking at these germline variants is right now we don't have a great biomarker, we don't have a great idea of who these patients are. We give these patients, the immune checkpoint inhibitors and allow them to kind of declare themselves. But it would be good to know, beforehand, before they go on these treatments, to see who are these people who would, benefit the most. Who are the people who, who would have these durable responses? Who are those who wouldn't, so that they might be able to get some other alternative therapy.
Okay, so are we kind of in a moment where we're figuring out, I guess like genomically or genetically, we're trying to find those people who respond the best to this type of treatment?
Exactly. So, I think you touch up on another point that I'm really interested in is, the genomics, the molecular characteristics of, the patient, and also the molecular characteristics of their disease, of their tumor. What would that tell us about how they respond? How will the tumor respond to treatment, to radiation, and how will the patient, the host, respond to treatments as well in the form of toxicity or side effects?
When you trigger the immune system using this protocol or methodology, sorry if I used the wrong word there, but when you trigger this type of response, Do you need to include additional medication to compensate for the strain placed on the immune system?
Yeah, so usually the goal of these immune checkpoint inhibitors is kind of release the brakes on your immune system, and allow your immune system to kind of work against the tumor itself. As radiation oncologists, we don't usually prescribe the immune inhibitors. What we're really excited about is an ongoing, avenue of research, not my own research, but definitely in the field, is trying to figure out ways of how radiation can act as a way to elicit an anti-tumor immune response.
What do you hope comes out of your research? What would you like this venture to fruitfully bear?
Well, I think the goal and dream of any physician or physician scientist is that the outcome of your research is something that reaches the patient and improves their lives, either by improving their response to the therapy or by decreasing the side effects from treatments that they receive. So that's the ultimate goal. But I think as a secondary goal, just as a scientist, I think if my research can uncover new questions, uncover new hypotheses to test and new directions to go, I think that's another great result that will just contribute more to the body of science.
In the current landscape, being a researcher, being a physician, it's not just about doing the daily work. Oftentimes there are additional considerations to deal with. Gail mentioned to me that you've managed in the past to wrangle some grants.
Yeah.
Is grant writing a large portion of the work you do?
Yeah, so it is probably a larger portion of my work, and I think it's great because you need money to do science, obviously, but it's also a great way to kind of think through. Sometimes if you talk to Gail, she can tell you that oftentimes I have some crazy ideas that are kind of half-baked. So writing a grant is a great way to make you more rigorous, right? Like take those kind of crazy ideas and put it down on paper and figure out, is this doable, right? Is this feasible with the amount of money that I have, the amount of time, amount of resources, and who should I collaborate and talk to? Who should I get feedback from in order to design a feasible experiment, a feasible research plan?
It sounds like the grant writing experience is helpful to you. Is that I know some people can find it quite arduous.
Yeah.
It seems like it helps you focus and it helps you really lay down the logistics of your plan.
Yeah. No, it's definitely helpful. It's not easy, and sometimes it's not always pleasant, but it definitely is useful. Yeah.
It would be nice if we could just do the science, but unfortunately we have to keep the lights on, right?
Yeah, well, I think grant writing is an art that you learn and get better at the more you do. And luckily, I've had mentors who've always pushed me to write grants and and to develop that way of systematizing what I'm thinking about and the experiments that I want to do and how to really carry out hypothesis-driven basic science research and translational and clinical research.
What is some advice you could give to someone who might be writing their first grant and really has no idea kind of what they're doing? What would be just a good rule of thumb for them to keep with them as they continue their scientific journey?
Yeah, I think the key is to just give feedback early and often. I think that's key, writing down coming up with a good hypothesis and specific aims for a grant, and then having multiple people kind of weigh in on it and give you critiques and give you suggestions can really make your grant much more robust and much more much more impactful. It's not always easy because oftentimes these grant deadlines sneak up on you and you're something like, I got to write this tomorrow. But I think I think that's my key advice, and I think from my own experience, it's always been useful to get second or third person, one of my mentors, to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and tell me what they like and what they don't like. So.
Ye, where do you hope to be in 5-6 years? Is this project going to go for the next decade, or do you hope to transition to different realms of radiation science? Where are you hoping to be?
Yeah, so I really, hope to kind of leverage my time right now. I've had, a fantastic opportunity to do a lot of research during residency, which is really a unique experience. And I really hope that, I can develop a research direction. And I think that, the projects that I have going now with looking at, the genetic differences within different patient populations, the host genetics as well as the tumor genetics has potentially a lot of clinical impact, especially given that genomics and molecular characteristics is going to play a larger and larger role in the care of patients. It's already affecting how patients, what patients get, certain types of chemotherapeutics in the clinic. I think radiation oncology will very soon follow that, and the molecular aspects of a patient's disease is going to drive treatment decisions in radiation oncology in the near future. And I really hope that next 5-10 years I'll be able to run some clinical trials and do more translational research in this field.
Interesting. It sounds like a fairly disruptive technology, but at the same time, the way in which you described it, its implementation should be slow enough that the adaptation won't be too crazy on the medical side of things.
Yeah. I think there's always good checks and balances, in terms of what things that are preclinical or translational get actually applied in clinic. So I think that all of these genomic biomarkers or genetic variants will undergo very rigorous validation studies and prospective clinical trials that will hopefully separate out ones that are going to be the most promising for clinical application.
Man, that's fantastic. There's a lot going on in your world. There's a lot happening. Anything else you're doing at the lab that you want to let us know about? I mean, this is cool stuff.
Yeah, I think that's more than enough for me right now. But I'm working on a grant right now, so hopefully get that out and hopefully get some money and do some more cool research that I like to do.
That's awesome. Well, Yi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
All right, you're welcome.
All right, thank you for joining us with the RRS podcast.